Right, I will get us going. So once again, just want to say thank you very much for people for coming today. So to introduce myself, my name is Michael Grime and I'm a Senior Project Manager for Truman Change, and I will be the host of today's Change Chat. So I recognise some names, but if for anybody that hasn't been to one of these before, basically what we do is we pick a particular topic, pull together a panel, which we have done today, and then provide you with tips and expertise on that topic. As I've mentioned, for those that have been here, been to one of these before, we like these sessions to be really informal, and we try to make them as interactive as possible. So if you do have any questions throughout, please feel free to unmute yourself, put your hand up, or put a question in the chat, which I will be monitoring throughout today's session. So as you may have noticed, and you may have heard me say, we do record these sessions, and everybody who is booked onto the session will receive a copy of the recording. So if for any reason you have to unexpectedly leave or you want to share this with anybody, then please do so. Also, we will put the recording onto our YouTube page and also use it on social media channels. So as I've mentioned the recording a few times, just to let you know that it only will pick up those people who are speaking. That's the only people who will get shown on the screen. That's just how we've set it up. So as I've mentioned, if you don't want to be recorded, if you do have a question, just pop it in the chat. So, as you will all be aware, today's session is on the people side of change, and I'm delighted to say that we're joined by the founder and managing director of Truman Change, Lucy Truman. So, Lucy, thank you very much for joining us today, and I just wondered if you'd like to introduce yourself before we move on to the main body of the chat.
Hi everyone, my name's Lucy. I'm an organisational psychologist and founder and managing director of Truman Change, and my research interest and specialism is change management in mainly the public sector.
Great stuff. Thank you, Lucy. So, as I said, before we get into the main body, we always have this conversation at the start of the conversation, at the start of the change chat, and it's just today. Can you explain to people why we have chosen the people side of change as today's change chat topic?
Yeah, of course. So it is a phrase that I hear a lot, where people are questioning, are we doing the people side of change right? And I think it's an interesting phrase because I'm not sure what other side of change there is. But I think what's happened is over the years, change management as a discipline has come from various different sources. And some of you that have heard me speak before will have heard me tell this kind of history of change management. Certainly in this country, although I understand that it can be different in other countries, change and how we do change has been quite heavily dominated by project and program management methodology, which the history of that lies very firmly in engineering. So we designed project and program management methodology when we needed to be able to plan and predict things. And in engineering, that's really, really important. So you would want to know, if you were building a bridge, exactly when stuff's going to happen and make sure that you had the specification right and make sure that all the technical stuff was correct. And in fact, the Gantt charts, which many of us use, were named after an engineer. So it's come very much from that discipline, and then we've kind of co-opted it and started to use it in change, when in actual fact it's missing that people bit. So it's about structure, it's about planning, and it's about control, and we absolutely need all of those things. But what it doesn't necessarily have is, okay, but what about how this change is going to land? What about when we need people to change their behavior and their environment? And PRINCE too, which is a really popular methodology. PRINCE stands for projects in a controlled environment, when actually culture and people are not particularly a controlled environment. So it's a phrase that I think came about when we started to acknowledge that there might have been a weakness in that methodology. So we started to realize, okay, this is all about process. It's about kind of how we get there. It's about planning. And in actual fact, we're missing something around the people. So I think that's where that phrase came from. And yeah, I thought it was an interesting thing to talk about, to understand that history, but also what does the people side of change really mean? So that's what I'm hoping we can sort of talk through today.
Great stuff, thank you. While you've been talking, we've had a few more people join the call. So as I mentioned at the start, if anybody does have any questions throughout, please feel free to pop them in the chat or put your hand up. So So you've touched on it there in regard to project and program management and the needs and what that brings in regard to providing structure and assurance. And you also have touched on there the need to engage with people and understand the culture. So please, can you explain why culture is so important and how to leverage it when undertaking projects?
So I think one of the things that we often start from, and it's funny because I was having a conversation this morning with two systems engineers who they very much start from a process place. So they look at, okay, what's the change that needs to happen? How do we plan that? What do we need around that? They look at processes and systems. My concern with that approach, and I think that it has great value in terms of you do need to think about process, absolutely, and you do need to be able to plan and you do need to have structure. But if you could bring in the perfect process, and if your culture is not ready to receive that, that change won't land. And in my experience, a lot of the sort of change programs that fail because they don't take into account the culture. So if you decide, okay, we're going to bring in a system where there's much more accountability and people are going to have to record their decisions, but you don't have a culture where that is possible, it means it doesn't mean that it's impossible to do it, but it means you need to consciously work on that culture. And a really good example of this is in the public sector, where a lot of my work is, where often change is driven by austerity or a need to reduce cost, when actually the culture of the organization is very often a purpose-driven culture. So people become social workers because they want to help others. They don't become social workers because they want to improve the cost effectiveness of social care processes. So I think if you blindly introduce a change program without thinking about your culture, it isn't going to land. And there is a really common statistic that is thrown around, which is 70% of change programs fail. That statistic has been thoroughly debunked. It was made up. There's no science at the back of it at all. So please don't kind of keep regurgitating it. But what is interesting is that the fact that it keeps being regurgitated, I think, is because it feels true. And I think it feels true because most people have been part of a change program that hasn't quite landed. And I think that is usually down to culture.
Great, thank you. So you've mentioned a few times there in engagement. So can you explain what good engagement looks like and what authorities can do to achieve good engagement as part of projects?
So I think that engagement, and at the risk of picking on somebody, and I've given no notice to, but I can see George is on the call. And George, if you want to drop comments in the chat, or if you want to unmute and get involved, very well. Georgia is our specialist in communications and engagement. Are you on it? You ready? The importance of engagement is that people. So when people, and it's not necessarily about change, but from a psychology point of view, we need to have certain things in place to motivate us, and change does require a significant amount of motivation. So one of the things I look at is, what are the theories around motivation and how does that apply to change? And there is a very popular theory that is that we need to have a sense of autonomy. We need to have a sense of mastery, which people use different words for, but it basically means we need to feel like we're competent, we're good at our job. And we also need to have good relationships. And I think that good quality engagement actually taps into all those three, because if you are starting your change program by engaging with others, then you are building their skill in change. So you're building their sense of mastery, you're building the relationships, and you're building that sense of autonomy, because what we don't react to well is when change is just done to us and we don't have any part in that and we don't have any say in that. That's from a psychological individual point of view. From an organizational point of view, there is research that says that when we take an approach where we have more diverse people in the room and diverse voices in the room, we come to better solutions. So it's kind of arrogant when we think that we can just come up with a change in a small dark room with just a small number of people. often, certainly in the public sector, and I imagine this applies anywhere, the frontline staff know how to make it better. So often we will start from a very guarded place with change and not engage people, and then realize that actually we might be wrong. What we're trying to do might not be a good idea, and the people that are doing the work might have a much better idea than we do. So that's what I would say as to why engagement is important. Georgia, if you want to jump in on your views as well, I'm sure it'd be great to hear them.
Well, I can do, but there's not a lot left to say, Lucy, after that. I suppose a couple of things that might be helpful to add are a phrase which I'm kind of growing to love more and more, and I think it very much started in that kind of sort of hyper local community engagement space. I actually think it can transfer across to organizational change as well. It's a bit cheesy, but I think it rings true, and it's nothing about us without us, because it really does recognize that you can have the best operating model identified in the world, you can have the best process in the world, you can have the best systems in the world, but if the people don't feel bought into it, if they don't feel like this is for me, this benefits my job, my life, whatever, those things won't happen. That they will just be, job done will never be job done, because you won't get the adoption and you won't get the take up and you won't get the genuine buy-in. So actually the people are critical to the success and the change that you want to put in, whether that's external, whether it's organizational change internally. That's it really, over and above what you'd already said.
And what about you, Michael? Because I know you've been working on a big engagement piece recently. What are your reflections?
Yeah, I think, and this kind of ties, I'm going to answer my own question here, because the next question was going to be about engagement and when should the engagement start. And I think what we found in all these areas of different pieces of work that we've done is it's got that engagement out there as soon as possible, and it's make people aware as soon as possible about the work and the benefits of it, because people hear about change, as you touched on, and they not instantly, but sometimes people think the negatives. So it's to, share that positivity, share the reason why it's happening, and get them people on side. And that's what I've kind of found from it. So my question to you, and I'll put it to you, in your opinion, when should the engagement start?
I think that's a really difficult question to answer, because it does differ from different circumstances. So there are times when this is a difficult question to answer. So there is a risk of going out to engagement too soon, before you as a leader have really thought it through, where you can cause more harm than good. So there is a risk of that. However, I have only seen that happen a tiny handful of times. What I have seen happen a lot more times is people going out too late. So it is a real balance. And I think it's more about the style in which you go out than it is about the timing of it. So if you go out late and you say these are the decisions that have been made, that's not engagement, and that's not going to help you. If you go out early, but you do it transparently and you say, we haven't figured this out yet, and we want your help in figuring this out, and you manage that carefully so that you're not setting people's expectations, then that's the best way to do it. So I would say you go out as soon as you can, but you do it as transparently as you can. If you go out and people feel that the decisions have already been made, they won't like it. If you go out and people feel that decisions have already been made and you're lying to them about it, people won't like it. So I think it's more important to get the style right than it is necessarily the timing. A lot of my research is around how change happened during the pandemic, and there was an interesting almost contradiction at that time where engagement shot up. So there was a huge amount of being honest about, okay, we need to communicate more. And it was fascinating because we were at a time when we couldn't. So we found ways around it. And what we saw was a massive shooting up in things like videos, kind of voice notes, different styles of communication, and much, much higher frequency. So people were sending out daily briefings to their staff instead of sending out something every 2 or 3 months. So the frequency shot up and the style changed, but that happened alongside this sometimes very clear direction. I won't get into the politics because often it wasn't very clear at all. But this kind of sense of we've all got to work from home from next week. Therefore, you engage on how you do that. I think that's quite, that's hitting the nail on the head. Because if you're just engaging for the sake of it and you don't have a sense of direction, then people will feel like you're wasting their time. If you're saying, this is the sense of direction, this is where we need to go, I need you to help me figure out how we're going to get there, generally speaking, that's a much more productive engagement. So there was this sometimes strong leadership, but massive co-production in terms of the how, because nobody knew how, nobody had the answers. And it was a case of getting partners together. Right, we need to get food out to people that are shielding and can't leave their house. How do we do it? There was that clear direction, clear sense of purpose, but a great sense of autonomy and freedom in how we do that. And I think that was quite powerful.
I think we've probably all been in meetings or events and people reflect on the engagement and the communication across and during COVID, and the amount of times you hear the comments of, oh, I wish we could still work like that. And when you think we were going through a pandemic and everything else going on in the background, it's one of the key things to come out of. So yeah, completely agree. And staying on the subject of engagement there, we've touched on engaging with staff. However, we found from our research that it's equally important to engage with middle managers. So please, can you share your thoughts on this and tips on how to engage with middle managers and get them on board, so to speak?
So middle managers are a really fascinating group, and I have a lot to say about this. So I think we've let middle managers down. I think that we have trained them in the art of stability, and stability management is important. But we've celebrated them in their ability to provide consistency and stability and consistent results. And if you think, and I'm sure many people on the call will have gone through some sort of management training at some point in their career, it's usually topics like managing people, managing budgets, following process. It's not so much about change. So then we get this group of people that don't have a great deal of autonomy because of where they are in the organization. And they are the front line of everybody's anxieties. So people say that people don't leave an organization, they leave a manager for a reason. Your relationship with your manager is absolutely key to your experience as a member of staff. So we're putting a lot of pressure on this group of managers, and we've not taught them how to do change. I don't think we've taught them that at all. So there's a gap there. They've been celebrated for consistency and stability, not for uncertainty and trying to figure it out as they go. And very often when we go through some sort of change, they are personally just as impacted as the staff. So they're having to navigate the tension between business as usual and their ability to lead change. They're having to navigate the tension of helping their staff with their emotional reaction to change, with their own emotional reaction to change. And they've not particularly, in my experience, often had some decent training and support around that. So if you want your change program to go well, that middle management level is absolutely crucial, because they are your conduit to your staff, but they're also a group of people that are hugely influential and often very under-supported. So my challenge to people that are listening is, if your organization is going through some sort of change, how are you helping that group of middle managers to be good at their job when you've taught them that their job is stability and now you're trying to teach them that their job is change? They are two very, very different mindsets. Now, good people learn to be able to carry both of those mindsets, but you have to learn it. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not a natural thing to do at all.
Yeah, definitely, and we found that we did some work with a council in Greater Manchester, and that was one of the key things that came out of that piece of work. And it'd be interesting to put that out to the group and the people who are on the call today, if they have any examples of that they'd like to share on what Lucy has just touched on. And engagement is, and we've got something from Lindsay coming through here. Thank you, Lindsay. And engagement is such a massive part of what we've touched on. So is there anything else that you think you'd like to share with listeners today about what they need to keep their eye on in regard to engagement?
So I mean, again, I'd invite Georgia to chip in with that if she's able to. For me, logistics is often not thought through or represented. You know, meeting people where they are is important. Making it easy for people to engage is important. Making it interesting for people to engage is important. Another finding from my research about what happened during the pandemic was that we took a much more human approach to how we thought of change. So instead of saying we need to do X, Y, and Z because of this, it was all we need to do this to keep people safe. And we started using a lot of personas. So one chief exec that I interviewed talked through the journey of how they made sure that they were able to support elderly people that were vulnerable and staying at home, but needed to take their cat to the vets. You know, so this whole thing of stories rather than thinking of people as numbers was a massive, massive change in engagement, and makes it easy for your staff to engage with. It makes it easy for them to think, yes, I am helping people stay safe, rather than I'm improving the process. So I think there's something about making it a bit more human and a bit more emotive. There's definitely something about the logistics. And one of the things that I harp on about a lot is really challenging people to think what will be different. So when you're communicating about change, we have a tendency, and we'll have all seen it, where there's a change program going on. So somebody set up an intranet page about the change program, and it's talking about there being a board meeting, and nobody cares. When actually it's not talking about what will be different. So your engagement needs to be focused on what is the outcome of this and what will be different, not the process of how we get there. Yeah, they'll want to know key milestones, but really the focus of that engagement should be the difference that you're making.
Yeah. Georgia, have you got anything to add to that? Sorry, we should have been to introduce Georgia to everybody. So Georgia is our comms and engagement lead for Truman Change. So we'll put you on the panel now, Georgia.
Probably wishing she hadn't joined the call. None of this.
I thought I'll sit in. This will be an interesting hour to listen in on. Not so much. I've forgotten the question was how we engage the middle manager and keep the middle managers kind of engaged, wasn't it? I think it's all of what you said, Lucy. It's about, you know, people talking to people, and again, I'm coming up with these little phrases today, and this sounds a bit mercenary, and it's not meant to, but it's actually looking at it from the manager's perspective, in that the what's in it for me perspective. And I don't mean that from a mercenary perspective, but from, you know, why do they care about your change? You know, how does it impact their team, their staff, their performance, which you'll be judging them on as their leader and their manager. So how is it going to make their job easier, their staff management better, their performance improve, you know, their staff happier? Ideally, you know, you want people working in a place that they enjoy, doing a job that they love, that they feel equipped to do, that they feel capable of doing, that they feel pushes them just enough to be motivating and interesting and exciting, and want to get up and go to that place of work every day, whether it's the office next to the bedroom or whether it's, you know, a few miles down the road or whatever. So I would say very much it's about those people skills, and really trying to and it is resource intensive, because really trying to pull it down as much as possible to what part of the business are they working in. Because if you're working in a large organization, you've got, say, a whole, you know, you've got a corporate enterprise wide change that you're putting in place. Your frontline operatives, say in waste, for example, will have a very, very different way of working to your frontline social workers. But you might be saying we're doing an enterprise-wide operating model. Well, how do you apply that so that it is relevant and feels right and feels appropriate for your waste operatives, your social workers, and everybody in between? And that's by recognizing the unique and different circumstances that they are working in and the pressures that they are under, and how the change you're asking them to go through actually improves and makes their working life better.
That's great. Thank you very much. We have had a couple of questions which might have just been answered during the Lucy and Georgia's last input. So we've had questions, and I'll read them both out as they kind of align, and this is in response to the middle manager's comments as well. So Lindsay has said, what would be your key tip for this group of managers? And Sophia has said, yes, this is an issue for me. How do we creatively engage these really busy staff group? So
I think you've got to create a safe space for managers because of what I said, of that emotional challenge they've got. So many of you will have heard of the You hear me okay? Because the cleaners are hoovering right outside.
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine.
So they need a safe space because they are, as I was saying, Maslow's hierarchy of need, which many of you will have heard of. That is a really age-old kind of motivation template, which I'm not 100% sure I fully buy into. But one of the things is, before you can get to that space of self-development, self-actualization, being at your best, there are certain needs that need to be fulfilled. And one of those needs, the very basic one, is your physical needs of, you know, kind of, have I got a roof over my head? Am I safe? When people's jobs are at risk, we are directly attacking that need. So if you've got a restructure going on and you've got middle managers that themselves don't know whether they've got a job, and then they're having to support other people's anxieties as well, you have to create a safe space for them. And then what I would be doing is I would be shining a light on how tough it is to manage that whilst managing themselves, to manage stability whilst also managing business as usual. And another tool which I'm not a fan of, but for this group of people it can work well, is the change curve. Now the change curve is didn't come from change at all. It came from studies of how people emotionally reacted to being told they were terminally ill. So it's really quite far away from organizational change. And the basic principle is that people will go through a series of emotions, which again I disagree with the order of it, and I think that it's actually much more chaotic and it's not a series of emotions. However, what is helpful about that is that it's bringing light to the fact that if there is an emotional response to going through change, and helping your managers to understand that helps them to spot that behavior and helps them to be prepared for it, because their biggest problem is they've not got enough information from above them because they don't know why the change is happening. So you can help with that. And then they don't know how to deal with the people below them that are reacting emotionally to the uncertainty that they face. So one of the things I've often done when it's been a sort of longer term change that's going to take a few months or to a year to do, is I would be having a monthly session with those managers to give them that space where you're giving them as much information as you can at that time about the change, but you're also giving them that space where they can talk about what some of their challenges are, because having them on side will make that go way smoother. So for Sophia, I don't know whether when you're talking about really busy staff group, if you're talking about managers, if that answers your question. If you're talking about generally just really busy people and that being challenging, then that is about all the things that Georgia said about what is in it for them and that what will be different for them, because none of us want to go to briefings where we hear about a change that actually we can't even visualize how that change impacts us. And the other thing is momentum. I think that we've fallen into the habit, and again, this has been driven by project and program methodology, of assuming that change takes a long time to happen, when actually change happening fast and with momentum, it can't constantly stay at that, because there is such a thing as fatigue. Don't know if there's such a thing as change fatigue, that jury's out on that one, but generally, you know, kind of being in this place of uncertainty is challenging. But again, COVID showed us that when we needed to make change happen very quickly, we were able to do that. And actually, pace is a good thing sometimes, because this cloud hanging over you of this change is going to happen at some point and I don't know where it's up to, is where we lose that momentum. So there's some of the things I would say about engaging busy staff groups. But please do keep asking questions, and I would love to know what your kind of change challenges are at the moment. If there's a particular challenge around the people side of change, I'm certainly happy to talk about it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think probably the last kind of question that I've got in regard to engagement is we've seen organizations use, you know, things such as change champions, things like what are your general thoughts on them? Do they work? Obviously it depends on the person, I suppose, but what are the pros and cons of using a technique such as that?
I like them. I do like them. I do think it depends on the people. So you've got to get the right people in there. There's something about thinking about who those people are in terms of influence, So there are people that are just sort of natural leaders that are not necessarily in a leadership position, but they are people who a group will look towards. They make good change champions. And to me, that change champion network is a two-way network. So it is your chance to get feedback back into the change program as to where people are and what's going on, but also it's more people on side of the change program that are able to help make that change happen. So it's about, are they the right people? And it's about, are you giving them the time and space to do it? Because if all you're doing is asking them to come to a meeting every few weeks and just hear a bit of information and then it's go back to the day job, then they may be limited in terms of what they can do with that. But I think anything that encourages engagement from a grassroots level rather than just a top-down level is powerful, because you need a mixture.
Yeah, that's great. I worked, as you're aware, I work with a large council on a finance transformation, and we, as part of that, we use change champions really, really well. They were excellent, really knitted themselves in amongst the team to were able to and take a lot of that stress and pressure away from middle managers as well. But like you say, it is finding them right people. So we'll move away from engagement for now. But if anybody has any more questions on that subject or anything they'd like to raise with the group, then please feel free to pop it in the chat. So we're gonna next question is: can you explain the importance of change leadership skills?
Yeah, so this comes back to what I've already said about that. I think we have had a number of decades where we've really focused on leadership being about creating stability, and we're now moving away from that. And so there is an importance that our leaders can do both. And what I'm concerned about is very often with leadership, we create pendulum swings. And that isn't necessarily healthy. And you see this a lot in, I've got some associates who are sports psychologists, and they're really interesting to talk to because that's quite a high pressured environment and one that is extremely public. So what you'll see there is swings in, and I know you're a much bigger football fan than me, Michael, but where a football club will really want a manager that is very results driven, and then when they upset everybody, they'll swing the pendulums the other way and want somebody that's really about people, and everybody's got an opinion about how that leadership should work. The real magic is leaders that are able to navigate those tensions, and change is a good example of that. So as a good leader, you need to be able to spot where is stability important and where is it less about stability and more about change, and being aware yourself that they are very different mindsets and very different approaches to work. So I think that's really important. I think being able to communicate a sense of purpose around the change is really important. And I think that I'm seeing a gradual, painfully slow increase in maturity in leaders to really start to think about culture. So whereas previously culture can often be seen as some magical airy-fairy thing that lives in the air that nobody can touch and is blamed for everything, I think people are starting to understand more about what culture is, and it's not in the air and can't be pinned down at all. We subscribe to a view of culture which came initially from Edgar Schein, who is absolutely worth reading up on if you're interested in culture, where it is about artifacts and messages. So it's how messages move around the organization. And when you start to see leaders that understand that concept of, I can shape the culture by shaping the messaging, and messaging is shaped through systems, through processes, through my behavior, through the behavior of others, and you start to really pin that down and focus on that, everything else falls into place. So I think learning about culture is the one piece of advice I would give. And I actually did a presentation to the district council network recently, where they have like a leadership program, and they said, what was your advice for leaders? And that's what I said: make sure that you can learn to observe and read and influence culture. I think that everything else comes from that.
Great stuff. I unmuted when you mentioned about football, but you didn't need me. I felt like you had
Feel free to chip in, I don't know.
So we're going to just have a conversation about workforce strategies. So can you explain the importance of workforce strategies and why they are crucial for successful change?
So workforce strategies, and again, one of the things I find interesting is that different professions sort of have developed over time, and HR in a lot of places has developed almost entirely separate from change. So workforce strategies are often a HR function, when in actual fact, if you're trying to make change happen in your organization, workforce strategies are a really powerful way of doing it. And often, again, you sort of change and transformation people and your HR people are kind of separate. So there's something about bringing some of these disciplines together. And to me, a workforce strategy is about imagining the future of your organization. And that means with change in mind. So imagine the future of your organization and then ask yourself, what type of workforce do I need in order to have that kind of organization? So what skills do they need? How do they need to work? What kind of diversity do I need? And all of that, I think, is just as much a change function as it is a HR function. And I think it's really powerful when those two work together on it, because you've got that ability to build rather than just expecting people to fall into line. And I think that often people do expect change to fall into line, or think that if they carry on as they are, they're going to be okay. And the last 5 years alone, the world is just a drastically phenomenal different place now to what it was 5 or 6 years ago. So I think change is no longer an option. It's no longer a luxury. It is that we are, in order to survive, evolution is the survival of the adaptable. It's not the survival of the fittest, it's survival of the adaptable. So in order to survive as organizations, we have to be able to change the way that we work in response to societal need. If it's the public sector, it might be business need in the private sector, but we do have to be able to do that. So I think being able to do workforce strategies well and with the future in mind, and thinking about, what kind of employer do we want to be? What's our employer brand? All of that being thought about at the same time is really powerful. But I don't see many organizations do it. And to be honest, very early in my career, I just ended up involved in a workforce strategy. And had it not been for that chance, I'm not sure that I would have necessarily thought of them in the same way. But through working on them, I've thought, these are a really powerful tool for change. And this is again where I come back to that phrase, the people side of change, because project and program management, whilst it absolutely serves a function, doesn't necessarily think of things like that. It doesn't force us to think of things in the same way that actually imagining your future workforce certainly does.
Great, thank you very much. I'm just going to move to a question we've got from Charlotte. So thank you, Charlotte. So how would you undo or reset the change direction with change agents where they have made independent decisions about what the change is, and some groups have gone off and made changes and people are following that is going in an opposite direction to the organizational change goal? This can occur where there has been a pause in implementation or resource or information gaps at the beginning.
This feels like an extremely specific question, Charlotte. Are you having a bad day? So how would I deal with that? So yes, that is a risk when you've got change champions. I think that one of the things that's really important to do is go back to the culture. So being able to really understand why that change is happening and going in different directions, I think is useful information. I would be tempted to get everybody back together. And I don't know how practical this is, but I would use, rather than it being attacking of you've taken this in the wrong direction, go back to what I was just saying about the world moving on and happening at pace and us needing to constantly adjust our style. And I would make that normal. So it is normal. Nobody sets up a change program and then delivers it to the letter. Like, that just doesn't happen, because we all learn things as we go through and realize, oh, that might not be quite the right direction. So making that a safe thing rather than an attacking thing, and making that a normal thing, I think is useful. I would be questioning potentially the skill set or the motivation, maybe not the skill set, because it turns out they're quite skilled. If they're managing to take it in a different direction, they're good at change. So maybe not skill set, but I'd be questioning the motivations of that group. So reading between the lines there, I wonder if you've got people with competing agendas that are trying to force the change in one direction rather than another. I think you're right to have pointed out that there may have been resource or information gaps at the beginning. A lot of this is getting that combination right that I talked about at the start, which is being able to communicate a clear sense of direction and purpose, but then co-designing the how, and getting that clarity, I think, would help. I hope that's a helpful response, because I feel like I'm sort of trying to read between the lines of a quite specific question there, but do feel free to follow up with another one or share some further information if you feel comfortable doing so.
Thank you. Well, we've also had another, there we go, very good answer. Thank you. That's great. Thanks, Charlotte. So Abigail has also come forward with a question. So what's the best way to segment your audiences for the change, and by how much to meet their needs? We usually consider role, location, age, etc. But there are other considerations which help, such as confidence, ability to use technology.
So I love that you're asking that question, because very few people do, and I think it's really important to think about segmenting. It's difficult for me to answer the question without knowing the context, because it is context dependent. The way that I would probably approach it is going back to the what will be different question, and group your people in terms of what will be different and how that difference impacts them. It can be useful, certainly, to think about levels of confidence and so on. In some change programs, things like location will be really important, but in others it will be fairly irrelevant. So I think you'll kind of have to figure out how applied to your change, which is why I would go back to the what will be different. One of the tools that I really, really love, which is very connected to segmenting your audience, is the kind of persona tool, where you come up with a series of personas and then you apply it to them. The reason why I love that as a tool is it personalizes it, and it enables people to think of it in more human terms. So yeah, I feel like it's a difficult question to answer. I can see George has taken a camera off, so she may have some good tips on it, because it is very specific to the change. But I would group them based on the change. So if there's a certain group of people that you know all of them are going to be impacted in this way, they're going to feel this way, they're going to have to change the way that they do X, Y, or Z, then I would group them together. Go on, Georgia.
Yeah, thanks. It does link really into the personas that you were just talking about, and it probably almost sits behind a bit of the theory, like behind the personas, really. But it's a little bit of behavior change theory just to kind of throw in, and it's a model called COM-B, where the B stands for the behavior change, because effectively you want them to adopt a particular behavior, which is the change you're asking them to embrace. And it's the factors that go into that when you're analyzing your audiences, and it's around your capability, opportunity, and motivation. So when you talk about capability, it's things like, have you given them the tools to change? Have you explained enough what they need to do? Have you are they mentally capable of adopting the change that you want? Then there's the opportunity. What are you putting in place to make it easy for them to adopt, to make it attractive to them to make the change? And then M is the motivation, which really comes down to that the emotional bit that Lucy was talking about. Why would they? What is the benefit that they're going to get from this change? So it's COM-B. We could probably have a whole nother session on behavior change at some point, perhaps. But yeah, it's COM-B, and then there's loads of other factors around how you frame that change, called the EAST model, which is easy, accessible, social, and timely. But I won't go into that now, because I know I'm gate crashing it a bit. But maybe we'll hold that thought for the future.
No,
Did you say go on with it?
Gate crash away,
Yeah.
Jordan.
Oh, okay. So yeah. So it's the alternative is EAST, which is how you then frame the change that you're asking people to embrace. So how easy are you making it for them? And what support are you putting in place? How attractive have you made it? So, rather than having some out of the box thing that looks really dull, actually, yes, it's about how you sell it to them, but also physically, how does it look? Does it look like something people want to engage with, and a change that people want to embrace? And then there's the social side of it, which is very much the people side. Who else is doing it? Why are they doing it in their peer group, their working peer group, I mean? And then timely, and that that links a little bit to the conversation we're having a bit earlier around when do you do the engagement, when do you start rolling out the change. So getting that timely communication and that timely engagement, that so you're not going too soon and you're not going too late either, so you're hitting them just at that sweet spot that makes them say, oh, this is for me. And so they're just some sort of behavior change models that I wouldn't claim to be a behavior change expert, but I know a little bit, enough to throw that into the discussion anyway.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Just wanted to, we've touched on some really good examples, some really good tips and techniques there. So I just wanted if you wanted you to share some examples with us, Lucy, on where on some of the work that Truman Change have done on people's side of the change.
Yeah, sure. So we help organizations in 3 different ways. So we help organizations to be good at change themselves. So that is where we will help them to reflect on what their approach to change is. We have something called a Change Accelerator program, which we've done in various organizations, where we look at skilling the organization up to do change well. So for that, we would be looking at what's your projects and program management processes. We'd be looking at what's your sort of skill level around change with your middle managers, what's your comms resource like, and how skilled up are they for doing change. So that is a sort of, are we good at change? The second way that we help is through training and facilitation. So I often get asked, and was actually in Leeds last week with a client where they are just starting their business planning process and wanted to bring some psychology into that and bring some facilitation into that in terms of how they go about it. So that's where you would buy us in just for a day or two to deliver something. And then we also do interim management. So one of the big gaps is where people just don't have the resource to be able to deliver work. We do a lot of kind of providing that bolt-on resource. So we do a lot around engagement, which I know Michael and Georgia are just finishing up a piece in Leicestershire where they've been engaging with the community around a nature strategy on behalf of the council, because council just didn't have the capacity to do that work themselves. We also do sort of project delivery on an interim basis. So we're doing some work at the moment for a local authority that's getting ready for potential housing inspection. So providing some structure around what their approach would be for that. And obviously back in the getting good at change, we do a lot of work around culture, because in order for your organisation to be good at change, you do need to be able to understand your culture. And where I see a lot of organisations go wrong is, they will pick up a methodology, whether it's Agile, Prince 2, Waterfall, whatever it is, they'll pick up a methodology and they'll build a function to deliver that methodology, not always paying attention to the culture of the organisation. And particularly in local government, where a lot of my work is, you have a lot of people in there who are people like social workers that, project management methodology is just not what they signed up for. It's not what they come to work for. So then you try and force a methodology on, and actually what you end up doing is slowing change down, because you're making it really difficult for people to be innovative and making it difficult for people to make decisions and take action. So I wouldn't want anybody to take away that I am against project management, because I was, came up the ranks as a project manager, and I think that it has some really useful tools. But I think if you are driving change from project management as your dominant force, it's really, really dangerous. You need to be driving change from a people force and a culture force, and using the project management tools to help you, not the other way around. So we do a lot of work in that culture space of identifying what's the blockers.
That's great. I think the one thing for me to follow up with that is that we recently did some work with a planning service in Lancashire, and we could have just looked at it in a project management kind of program management head on, but getting the people in the room and understanding their thoughts, understanding where their perspectives was one of the main reasons why it was a big success. So I'd completely agree with you there. We're coming to the last 10 minutes, so if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. And kind of how I kind of always end these with you, Lucy, is that, if people take away one main tip, what would that be from yourself?
I think it is start with the people. So, the minute you think, right, there's a change I want to make, that's when you start thinking about what would be different for the people. and think about that from different perspectives. So if you're making a change happen in I don't know, a charity, then you need to think, what would the change be for the staff? What would the change be for the managers? What would the change be for the people that donate to the charity? What would the change be for the people that benefit from the charity? And the same in local government. If you're changing a service, you know, how does this impact the public? How does it impact members? How does it impact staff? So answering that question, what will be different from different perspectives, forces you into a place where you are thinking people first rather than process first. And then when you've done that, then start looking at what is the culture like now? So how will the culture need to change? And design your approach to change based on the culture, which is the opposite of what I just said around, you know, don't pick up a change book and think, okay, this is a change process, I will follow this process, without really understanding your own culture first, because there isn't anything behind those change processes. You know, speaking as a psychologist and a professional change person, changes come up through project and program management, which was not designed for people change. And then change management came about as a profession, which has been heavily dominated by consultants, which, you know I am one. What a consultant wants to do if they want to come up with a nice, easy model that they can sell to lots of people. And then they think, oh, let's get people accredited in it. Let's get people licensed in it. There's no evidence behind it. It's not necessarily correct. And that's not to say there's not some good ones. And I've quoted some today, you know, like Change Curve, and George has shared some. They're useful to know. They're useful for models. But if you're just picking up a model and applying it blindly without thinking about your people and your culture, and I can say as a consultant, because I work in hundreds of different organizations, they are all different. Like, then that's why those things don't work. They're all different. So think about your culture and pull in the right tools for that. Don't just blindly follow a change process. I think that's dangerous and a little bit lazy, actually. It's probably a harsh thing to say, but yeah, intellectually lazy.
Yeah. No, thank you. And Georgia, as seen as you've been a late addition to the panel, I'm going to put the question to yourself. What would be your one main tip for people to take away from today?
Well, it's not to contradict Lucy at all, but I do think look at models, not necessarily aligned specifically to one. But I'm going to bang the drum a bit for kind of comms models, because my background is comms and marketing and engagement. So actually, maybe have this is a bit left field. Actually, maybe have a bit of a campaign mindset, because every campaign starts with, where are we now? What's our problem? In almost in local government or in, you know, behavior change terms. What do we want to change, and where do we want to end up? What is the desired state that we're looking for, and what is the campaign we're going to put in place to get us there? What are our objectives? What is our audience insight? What do we know about all the people that this change impacts? What is their role in the change? Are they enablers? Are they end users? Are they the service users who get the outcome of the internal change that we're putting in place? And then what's our strategy? How are we going to do this? And where comms comes in, where process comes in, where change comes in, where HR comes in. Who is your team? How are you going to assemble them? What are your core messages? What are your core calls to action? Of course, the implementation, the great big chunk in the middle, constantly reviewing. Are we getting there? Are we doing it right? Are people behaving and changing in the way we want them to? If they're not, why not? Have we got our change champions in place? What are they telling us about that, for example? So constantly checking back. So that's a bit of a campaign process, in summary, that you could maybe look at if it's appropriate.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, you know, I love models and actually our next change chat is about the psychology of change, where we'll be looking at a lot of sort of organizational psychology theory and how that applies in a changing environment. I think the risk is where, and we will have all met them, somebody's read one methodology like a Walking Prince 2 manual, and that is all they apply. And there's a saying that is, to someone with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I think that skilling yourself up and learning a variety of models from a variety of different disciplines. So when I'm thinking about change communication, I'm looking at, what would a marketing person do? What would a politician do? you know, because their job is to influence people. What would people do from other professions besides myself? Which is why I think the whole workforce strategy straddling HR, I think that's what's powerful when you look at how people are solving these problems and taking and having a toolbox of different models that you can pull out from when it's the right time, which I absolutely know, Georgia, that's your approach. I think it's a powerful thing. It's when people become fixated. You can't be a change professional with a fixed approach. Like, that's an whole oxymoron in itself, isn't it?
Right, we'll come into a close now. And Lucy, you touched on before your research and what you've been working on. So just wanted just ask if you could share what's next for you and what's next for your research.
Yeah, so I'm hoping to start a PhD soon. And I want to continue the research about how we made change happen so quickly during the pandemic. So I think there's a huge amount of knowledge and useful information to be learned from that exercise. At my last piece of research, I interviewed chief execs. I think I'd like to interview a broader audience this time. So yeah, do please let me know if you'd like to take part in any of that. I've got a book hopefully coming out this year. I'm editing it at the moment. Turns out writing isn't that bad, but editing is awful. You realise how bad you are at writing. So we'll see. I'm working through that as quickly as possible. And I'm also interested in potentially holding an event specifically around change. So I am looking for recommendations for venues for an event. If anybody's got any recommendations for a venue for an event for maybe 50 to 100 people, because I just feel like I want to bring people together from different disciplines where we can start to explore, like, how do we bring good psychology into change? How do we bring good comms professionals into change? How do we bring HR into change? How do we bring project management into change? You know, how do we pull on multiple disciplines instead of carrying on down this road where we've created sort of pillars of professions that I think are all trying to do the same thing, but from different perspectives. So yeah, that is what's next for me, and always open to chatting to people that are interested in taking part in either research or events, or if you would like to have a conversation about getting some support, and I will just drop my email address in the chat so that everybody's got it. Because somebody else just asked there. But yeah, I think we've just got an opportunity at the moment after the pandemic. And those of you on the call that know me know I lost my dad to COVID right at the start of the first lockdown. So I was very personally impacted. But I think that there is an opportunity to learn from a period that was incredibly challenging and difficult, and yet some really good stuff came out, some really good stuff happened. And I am nervous about us sort of reverting back to more traditional ways of doing change, when I think the pandemic showed us that, you know, again, another profession we can look from is the military, emergency planning professions. When we have to take action quickly, it's those methodologies we use. It's not change methodologies that we use. So I feel a great pull towards, is there a way of redesigning change management? That's a big task, but is there a better way of doing change is what's next for me.
Right, that's great, thank you. Right, well, I will bring us to a close now as we're 2 minutes before 1 o'clock. So just want to say thank you again, Lucy, for joining us today and sharing your expertise. Also want to thank Georgia, who had no idea we were going to ask them questions when she jumped on. So thank you very much. And also just finally, we just want to thank everybody for joining. Before we finish, I just want to give you some dates for your diary for the future change chat, which Lucy did mention. So it is Friday, the 6th of September, and I'm currently trying to add that to the chat. There we go. So yeah, it's Friday, the 6th of September, the psychology of change. So if you want to book on, please follow that link that I've just posted in there. Also, the links will be available on our website and also our social media platforms. And also, if you have enjoyed today and you want to catch up, it sounds like you want to binge some of our previous change chats, then we have several on our website. They include comms and engagement, housing, service reviews, household support funds. So there's a lot on there. So as I said, next steps, you'll all receive an email which includes a link to the recording. And I also just want to say thank you again for coming. If anybody does want to have a chat to either Lucy or myself, please feel free to do so. And if we have no more questions, I can see a lot of thank yous coming through. So you're all very welcome, and I look forward to seeing you all at a future Change Chat.
Thanks, everyone.